everyone. I'm Sophia. Hi, Melanie. I see Miss Dawson, a couple of faces I recognize. So I'm actually going to share my screen. I have a presentation. Right. I just want to make sure you guys can see that. So I'm going to be talking. Awesome. Thanks, Melanie. So I'm going to be talking about what's new this year. Obviously, with COVID and everything going on, things are looking a lot different, especially from this picture, sadly. So I think the biggest thing this year is that instead of being on a team of two, you'll actually be debating by yourself. And so that's sort of what Clay was talking about, one-on-one debating. It's sort of similar to Lincoln Douglas, but we're still policy debaters. And then if you're affirmative, you'll be giving 3 speeches. And then if you're neg, you'll be giving 2 speeches. The only difference is for affirmative, your speeches will be a little bit shorter since you're giving more. And then for neg, your speeches will be a little bit longer because you're giving less. And then it'll still be the same. You get 5 minutes of prep time, so don't worry. This just breaks down kind of the speech order and time specifically. I'm not going to read everyone out, but you guys can kind of just look through it. It's also on the website. The only difference really is just the times for everyone that's not middle school novice, but besides that, the format stays the same. So it'll be AF will give their constructive, there'll be a cross-ex, neg will do their constructive, and then another cross-examination, and then the first affirmative rebuttal, neg will do a rebuttal, and then the very last speech will be the second affirmative rebuttal. And then as you see at the bottom, you guys have prep time. All right, so because the format is a little bit different, you guys are probably like, well, what's going to happen in each speech? And so I'm going to go through them just a little bit, but you'll get to figure some of that like a little bit more throughout the debate season. So for the affirmative constructive, it'll be just like your 1AC. You're going to read your evidence. You're going to talk about the solvency, harms, all the stock issues, and then you'll also read the plain text. So exactly like a 1AC, what you guys know how to do. And then for the negative, you'll be doing similar to the 1NC. You'll read something off case, either disadvantage, a counter plan, critique, whatever is available to you guys based on the division that you're in, which I know is different if you're like middle school novice, high school varsity. There's a big range of that. And then try and answer as best as you can to what the affirmative said in their constructive or their 1AC. So then we get to the rebuttals, and this looks like a lot, but I'll break it down for you. So the first affirmative rebuttal, remember you always want to extend what you said in your first speech. You want to keep extending and keep explaining your arguments. That way you can explain better why you win. And then you always want to answer what the neg says. And so since this is the first affirmative rebuttal, you want to answer what the negative said in their negative constructive. And don't forget, in that speech, you can also still use evidence, because you have your second affirmative rebuttal where you're going to try to not use evidence. So after the first affirmative rebuttal, you'll have your neg rebuttal, and that'll be the only rebuttal you give. So you can use evidence there if you want, but we really want you guys to try and just use your evidence maybe more as a reference and less reading word for word off of your card. That way you can explain kind of the story and your ideas. And so same thing, always extend your arguments. You can always better explain why you think you win. And then the very last speech of the debate, just like a normal debate, the affirmative will get the last word. And in that speech, you really want to tell just a good story of what the affirmative does, what the plan text is about, and always extend your arguments and answer what the neg said. I know that's kind of brief. A lot of you guys probably already know some of that, but I definitely think that's a good review as we kick off the debate season. So, and then even though the debate season is looking a little bit different this year, I think something that the AUDL really stands for is community over competition. And we did this camp when we had that kind of phrase in the back of our shirts. But that's something that we really want to emphasize this year. I know that tournaments are always like a lot of fun, and coming back from your rounds and telling your coach like how you did and getting medals like around your neck and taking cool pictures like the ones here. But this year, because it's looking a little bit different, we really just want to emphasize the process of learning. It's going to be a lot of fun, even though it'll be online and slightly different. You'll learn a lot about public policy, how to speak. You might even learn like how to use Zoom better. I know I'm learning that kind of stuff. So we just really want to emphasize community over competition this year. And because we're online, we definitely want to make sure we stay in touch with you guys. This was kind of a short presentation, so if you have any questions, not just about this presentation, but really about today, there's the email. You can email atlantadebate@gmail.com. And there's also like a form on our website where you can put your name and information with your question or comment, and someone will definitely be able to get back to you. And then our YouTube is also a really great source. I think the summer programs use that a lot, and there's a lot of great speeches of just like different students like us talking to you guys about like the evidence for this year, flowing tips, things like that. So definitely check out the YouTube. This will also be posted on there too. So, and then if you want to read evidence and kind of get ahead and prepare for the debate season, you can go to this link. It's same on the AUDL website, and it should take you to the drive where all the evidence is available for you. So thank you. I'm going to hand it off to Sukriti, and she's going to talk a little bit more about this year's like plan and the app and stuff.
Hi, everyone. I'm Sukriti, and today I'm just going to tell you a little bit about the mass incarceration affirmative evidence. And I'm just going to give kind of an overview of what the evidence is trying to say and kind of pieces of the evidence that you can use in your debates. There we go. Okay, so first I just wanted to review with you all the 1AC structure and kind of some parts of the 1AC. I don't know if you all have had any familiarity with this before, so we're just going to go over this really quick. So first, we're going to talk about inherency. So the way I like to think about inherency is you're looking at why can't or won't we solve the harms of the status quo. And when I say harms of the status quo, I'm just trying to say like what are the bad things that are going on right now that we're trying to solve, and what's in our way right now? Why aren't we trying to solve it? The next part of the 1AC is solvency. So now we're just saying, how does our plan solve those problems? And then we go over the two advantages, which are actually the harms. And you're talking about these are the problems that we solve in the status quo. So they are advantages to the plan. So we're just going to go over these types of parts and all the evidence that is available to us in the packet. So the first part is inherency. So right now, the inherency card just mostly talks about this recent reform called the First Step Act. So the First Step Act is basically just like a bill that Trump put through, and since that's like the current that's what's currently going on in criminal justice and the legislative agenda, that's kind of the inherency because that's the current structure of the status quo. And this card is saying that despite the First Step Act, there's still a lot of people incarcerated and that it's insufficient. So it kind of makes two separate arguments for that. And I tried to separate it by color, so it becomes a little bit easier, you know, to see all those different lines going everywhere. But so it kind of makes two arguments. First is that the rates are really high, and that the First Step Act doesn't, it's not wide enough because it only affects federal prison, which is like 10% of the prison population, and 90% are state and local facilities. So that's saying that's a big problem with the First Step Act. And it also makes some additional arguments. So you'll see like a lot of times cards make some small additional arguments that you can actually use later in the debate, even if it's not like directly falling under the tag. And a couple examples here are that it says that it's racially disproportionate, the incarceration that happens. So that's an argument that you can definitely use later in the debate, especially with the racism advantage. And that is dehumanizing, abusive, and that it's a core civil rights issue, which you can use to kind of emphasize the importance of the plan later. So the next contention is solvency, and there are two cards in the solvency advantage, and I think the main takeaway from these cards is that it focuses on the mechanism of the plan. And what I mean by that is kind of like the way the plan does things. And the way it tries to solve mass incarceration is change financial incentives. So you'll kind of see, actually, if you look at part 2, is kind of where it lays out what exactly the reverse Mass Incarceration Act does. And basically, it uses financial incentives to try to have the states reduce their policies and gives them like kind of requirements on how they do that. And it says that this strategy works because now jumping back to the first bullet point, it cites the 1994 crime bill, and it says that right now 3.8 billion is largely focused on increasing incarceration. So their logic is to kind of just reverse that incentive. And you can see in the next card as well, again, it talks about like the funding mechanism and why that's the most important part. And it uses the example of the 1994 crime bill again. And it also gives another reason that there's some momentum now because some states do kind of want to change their policies and kind of decrease mass incarceration, especially I would say with these like recent pressure on states, but it just has to be encouraged. So maybe you could use this to say that, yes, it will be successful if we just give them the money to do it. So I just wanted to like help you pull out the key parts of the card and be able to kind of see where in the future you'll be able to use that in debates. So now let's move on to the advantages. And I just wanted to remind everybody too, in the chat, feel free to ask questions. And I can't directly see the chat right now, but I'll make sure to answer them as it goes on. So let's go over the poverty advantage. The claim this card is making is that prison pushes people into poverty and the process is cyclical. And what I mean by that is that it happens to them and it happens to their kids and it's hard to break out of. So of people who are incarcerated. So the 2 points that it's making here is that first is that it breaks social mobility, and social mobility is kind of the ability to move between socioeconomic classes, the ability to move between different types of jobs. And it says that prison or being imprisoned kind of blocks anyone's ability to do that, or it doesn't block, but just makes it much harder. And additionally, it puts a lot of economic and emotional strains on the family, which often has a lot of effects on the kids, which makes it kind of cyclical as well. So there's two different arguments you can tease out there. And it makes the separate argument that high incarceration rates also affect other parts of the community, like the economy, health, wealth, housing. So it's kind of a really large effect. And again, we get the argument that it's disproportionately affects Black men and I would say Black women as well, but this card only mentions men. So the next one is just the second card in the poverty advantage. And this is more about the costs of incarceration. And just the cost of incarceration itself is really high. You could imagine just to house a lot of inmates, it takes like money to feed, house everyone, and the state has so many, so it has a lot of costs, but there's also a lot of hidden costs. And this card basically lays out all those sources of hidden social costs which might come up with incarceration. So it just goes through like diminished incomes, higher mortality rate. It might actually be that incarceration is not effective at stopping crime and might cause more crime. There's a higher chance of children being incarcerated. We kind of went over that process earlier, and there's a lower chance of their children finishing high school. And now you can see like later on in the debate, it'll make your argument way more convincing if you're like, instead of just saying, oh, not only is there a lot of costs, there's a lot of hidden social costs. If you list out all these kind of reasons teased out in the card, it'll make your argument way more effective because you can say it's because of this, this, and this. So the judge will really get the impact of your affirmative. And lastly, we're just going to quickly go over the racism advantage. The tag in this card is trying to claim that mass incarceration is the continuation of violence against Black Americans, and it disproportionately subjects Black communities to impoverishment. So we have to be careful when we're discussing racism and just be careful of how you're talking and everything. But as long as you're academic about it, it should always be good. The 3 points this card is trying to make is that first is that Black Americans are disproportionately incarcerated and imprisoned, and especially by the war on drugs. The second kind of sub-argument it's making is that these roots are historical in slavery and Jim Crow, and that it impacts the wider community, and causes poverty, segregation, and starvation. So it's kind of bringing up together all the impacts that we've discussed before, but it's kind of also saying that not only do all these things happen, it disproportionately affects Black and Brown Americans. And last card in the 1AC is just kind of a card which preempts a 1NC argument. And what I mean by preempts is just like us tries to answer it before it even comes up. And this one says that even if incarceration rates are improving, there's such a big gap between the two rates. And it kind of gives some statistics on how big the gap is, and then explicitly acknowledges that this trend exists, that there's a smaller gap, but then says, like, if you see the second bullet point, like, it's so slow that at the current rate that the gap is decreasing, it would still be disproportionate for many decades. So these are just some pieces of the 1AC, which you can use later on in the debate and try to use it to beat some of the negative evidence. And now we are open for any questions that you might have for either what Sophia talked about, what I talked about, or anything related to kind of the start of the year.